The Beatles were neither prophets nor preachers of the gospel, so it's still a bit surprising and inspiring even till now how they were indirectly able to set off a nationwide religious movement popularly known as the Submarine Churches. The Submarine Churches were inspired by the Beatles' Love Gospel from the 1968 world-renowned animated jukebox musical comedy adventure film. So in today's video, we are going to talk about Submarine Churches and how it was inspired by the Beatles' Love Gospel. If you want to know more about it, stay with me till the end of the video. Yellow Submarine, which drew inspiration from the Beatles band music, was directed by animation producer George Dunning and produced by United Artists and King Features Syndicate. Although it was initially released by the press that the Beatles themselves would be the ones providing voices of their characters in the film, apart from performing the songs, the real Beatles only participated in the closing scene of the film, with their cartoon counterparts acting by other actors and voiceover artists. The Beatles' music was used as the soundtrack for this film, and the band had always produced songs that had intergenerational appeal. This funny little film was directed by George Dunning and pulled off the trick of simultaneously appealing to both kids and their parents. Apart from influencing music, fashion, and animation, the film also led to the rise and movement of several churches dubbed the Submarine Churches, that were inspired by the Beatles' Love Gospel and as a result, buckled the tradition of religion. Before the coming of these submarine churches, people joined churches for many reasons, not all of which have to do with religion. For the likes of mainline churches that were increasing in the 1950s and 1960s, church statistician Constant H. Jackie Jr. believes reflected a time of relative euphoria in the nation, and the established churches benefited enormously. It was a time of the development of the suburban community, a return to the old, normal America at the end of World War II, said Jackie, longtime editor of the Yearbook of American and Canadian Churches. There was a tremendous birth rate, a tremendous amount of money available. The real income of the 50s was higher than it had been in any decade since. Along with that, he said, came a tremendous increase in church membership. A religious sociologist with the Southern Baptist Convention, C. Kirk Hathaway, has studied denominational switching and found that around 40% of American Protestants indicate a different denominational preference than they had when growing up. Hathaway and others say that denominational switching almost invariably seems related to economics. Thus, the upwardly mobile Baptist may become an Episcopalian as an adjustment to a new, higher socioeconomic status, Hathaway said. Yet when the United Presbyterians conducted a study around that time to try and find out why people were leaving the church, they discovered that most of the popular theories were wrong, said the Reverend Dr. Carl Dudley of McCormick Theological Seminary, who served on the study commission. So it was while all these activities were going on that the film made it to the United States that submarine churches, inspired by the Beatles' Love Gospel, started rising, and everywhere they appeared and settled, attracted a lot of these especially young and urban people. Most of these churches adopted the outline of a yellow submarine with a small cross on its periscope as their symbol, and along with it, they displayed peace signs, flowers, and other popular emblems of the 1960s. Within a year of the film being released into the market and getting to the shores of America, the churches were already more than enough that they started an organization popularly known as the Submarine Church Press, and their job was publishing national directories of about 40 of those churches, most of which were Protestant or with Catholic roots, and held a 3-day rap session or conference in Kansas City, Missouri. Their attendant usually varies and attends from different parts of the United States, such as New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, St. Louis, and Akron, Ohio. Based on the storyline of the film, the submarine was a place where people loved one another in a groovy way, and it was from there that they got the energy and strength to fight against the Blue Meanies, who invaded Pepperland and turned the happy and music-loving people of Pepperland into gray stones. Reverend Tony Nugent, a former co-pastor of one of such submarine churches that were in Berkeley, California, told the New York Times in 1970, "It also shows that a church has to have the flexibility and maneuverability." There were several of these submarine churches, and the majority of them have some of the weirdest and unusual names for a church, such as Alice's Restaurant, Ecstatic Umbrella, and Now Church, and were also known for their equally offbeat practices. To cap it all, when a church of so-called radical Christians attended the National Council of Churches in 1969, they had a slogan, "The Submarine Church is surfacing." A lot lot of these churches evolved from existing congregations, while some started from scratch and were independent of external influences. Apart from frequent meetings, fellowshipping within the church walls, they routinely met in parks, basements, and college plazas, and sometimes even staged elaborate protest-themed stunts. One Christmas, Alice's restaurant sent a couple and a donkey in search of lodging in a local hotel to lodge them, just like the biblical tale of Joseph and Mary searching for an inn in Bethlehem. And fortunately, the couple was able to get it. Some of these churches also adopted the refrain of John Lennon's melody, "All You Need Is Love," which was spelled out in mod-style letters across the op-art landscape of the film. Some of these churches also borrowed the fashion sense of the film, with Reverend Richard York of the Free Church of Berkeley, a submarine church with ties to the Episcopal Church, wearing a flowing robe of pink, yellow, green, and gold that looked like it was ripped from one of the film's far-out backgrounds for his ordination in 1968. The bishop who performed his ordination wore a plain white cassock. One thing that sounds so iconic around the whole movement was that none of the musicians were religious or practiced any well-known religion. In fact, according to Paul McCartney, a songwriter and musician who gained worldwide fame with the Beatles, from whom he played bass guitar and shared primary songwriting and lead vocal duties with John Lennon, none of the Beatles believed in God. According to a religious studies professor at Iowa State University, Hector Avalos, who has written so many times about the Beatles and religions, the Beatles viewed love and peace as the highest values in living a good life. He also went further to say that living a good life was not about salvation or following the Bible. That emphasis on love erased all the isms that Lennon specifically hated. John Lennon was the founder, co-songwriter, co-lead vocalist, and rhythm guitarist of the Beatles. One of the band musicians, George Harrison, was interested in Hinduism, and Lennon, who identified as an atheist, proclaimed that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus in 1966. Several of their songs, including Eleanor Rigby from the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, are sharply critical of traditional religion. A lot of scholars have tried to establish their careers by finding out facts and sussing out symbolism and meanings in Beatles lyrics, and some have gone to great extent of arguing that although the four musicians were not religious, they were at least spiritual and often expressed that in their music, especially in the second half of their discography. So the intention of the Beatles was never to start a nationwide religious movement with their love gospel, or rather to craft a new religion or even to birth churches that strayed away from the traditional churches that were existing in that period. Rather, they got into music for the kicks and the sex, and not to be the spreaders of good news, according to a British music journalist, Steve Turner, wrote in the Gospel according to the Beatles. But whether they had the intention or not, it didn't matter, as their love gospel not only came but conquered the way people practiced religion at that period. It changed the way they saw faith, especially among the youth and urban people who were already looking for alternatives to traditional churches. They wanted to experience something new and different. And fortunately, the Submarine Churches came at the nick of time and not only influenced religion, but changed the whole game, because whereas the traditional churches were always conversing and meeting in the church, the Submarine Churches decided to do something different, and not only met in churches, but also in parks, basements, and college plazas, etc. Almost anywhere that they found conducive and favorable for their gathering. What are your thoughts on today's video? Please let us know in the comment section below. And if by now you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our incredible videos. Keep an eye out for the next one. Bye for now.